Good afternoon again. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce a friend and former colleague of mine, Donald McGurk, who's the current CEO of Codan, who are an Adelaide-based company in Mawson Lakes these days. Donald's been with the company for over 20 years, and he's been the CEO for the past 10. And he's going to talk to us today and give us some insights into an Adelaide company that started off out of Adelaide University and now is in the ASX 200. So it really is a world-leading company in many different industries. So without further ado, I worked for them for over 20 years in a couple of stints, but they've gone gangbusters since I left. So my pleasure to introduce Donald. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the turnout. This is fantastic, and it's a hard act to follow with you young guys. You've done a great job, and congratulations on everything you've done. Well done. So Codan, I've got some slides here. I'm really not going to talk to the slides. I'm just going to talk to you about Codan and some of the stories. We're probably the biggest secret in Adelaide. Every time I go out for a beer, which is quite often, you go to the pub and people say, what do you do? I work for Codan. Oh, what do they do? Now, that's a strange question for a company that's valued at $3.3 billion, have 1,000 people these days. But we sell mostly overseas, so no one really knows who we are or what we do. So it's a strange sort of situation. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. Firstly, how the company started. I think Gary introduced us as a company that went from Royal Flying Doctors to ASX 200. And the start of the company was quite remarkable. 3 guys out of Adelaide University, they were engineers. They were working together in one of their father's backyard sheds. And they moved into Norwood, into premises, and they saw this tender hit the street for an HF radio, a high-frequency radio for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. And they went to themselves. These guys were all pretty smart guys, I've got to say, right? They were kind of really good electronic engineers. And they went, look, how hard can it be to make an HF radio? Now, they didn't even have a factory as such. They had some kind of premise that they were doing some electronic repairs and calibration for universities and just anything they could do to make a bob or two. And they put this tender response in to say, well, we could make this radio, we can do this, we've got the wherewithal, and we can find the money, and we can find the tooling and all that sort of stuff. And what happened next was remarkable. This wouldn't happen today. If it happened today and you were a procurement guy, you'd be fired. They actually gave the guys the chance to make this radio. And what happened next was remarkable. They made a HF radio that today is still seen as one of the best high-frequency radios in the world, which is fantastic. They then attracted a lot of attention from overseas. The United Nations, Aid and Humanitarian, they said they got to hear about the Royal Flying Doctor Service radio, and they said, we want this as well. So we ended up as a company that after 62 years was probably pioneer in the field from South Australia of actually going into the export market. So that's how the company started, and I've been with the company 20 years, as I've said, and I've got to say I was promoted from inside the company after 10, and that was a shock to me because I thought they could have done better, right? But I can tell you that after 3 years in the job, so I went in 2010, in 2013 I was saying to people, this is a walk in the park, this is easy. We had 3 record profits in the 3 years, and I thought, I don't know what all this CEO stuff's cracked up to be. It's pretty straightforward. You just go around getting people to do stuff and look intelligent and smart, and things happen. And I remember the chairman of the company at the time, who's David Simmons, saying to me, Donald, anybody can run a company that's going well. I'd like to see what you do when it doesn't go well. That'll be the true mark of you as a leader. And I've got to say that within 6 months of him saying that, we'd gone from the record profit of $46 million net profit to 9 in 1 year. And I didn't do that just to prove I'm wrong and say, well, let's just see how we go under pressure. What had happened to us was we were copied and counterfeited by Chinese counterfeiters. So they actually took our brand, so they were using the MindLab brand. I've got the brand on my shirt here. and they were actually purporting to be us in our international markets, and they, in that year, cost us $80 million worth of sales in 12 months. Now, at that time, our sales in total were about 150. So it was more than half of our sales we lost. Of course, we had all these people that we were employing, and we couldn't afford to pay them, and our stock price went from $3.95 down to 52 cents. We had $100 million in net debt, and I've got to tell you, things were pretty tough. And the fact that I'm still here telling you the story is a miracle in itself. But we did some things which as a company, I think defines the spirit of South Australian people. And we got together and we took responsibility for it. We didn't blame anyone for saying, look, poor us, victim, blame, denial, reason. We took it on the chest. We were responsible for what had happened and accountable. And we set about trying to rebuild the company from a position of what I would call extreme stress. And the only way that we could defeat the counterfeiters, and we couldn't close them down, it's very difficult to do that. There's brands that are much bigger than ours that have suffered the same fate. You just need to buy a handbag or a watch to know how that works. But we went to the board and we said, look, we can actually turn this around. We need to reinvent. The only way to beat people that seek to imitate is to outthink them, out-innovate them, out-market them, and ultimately out-compete them. But that takes time. So we redeveloped a product. We've got a product now, which it might be up here somewhere, the GPZ 7000. So the product that was copied was the GPX range of products. So we took another 2 years to redevelop a product called the GPZ, and from our radio division, we put military-grade encryption in all of the software to protect it from being copied. And that was a big risk. It cost us $20 million to reinvent ourselves at a time when we had $100 million worth of debt. And it took 2 years. So the stock market really didn't like us for that period. We were not performing. They were worried that we'd gone from this hiatus of $3.95 and share price and $46 million worth of profit to rock bottom. But what happened next was really revolutionary. Not only did we develop the machine, but that machine is now the preeminent metal detecting machine in the world. It's a $10,000 machine. And over the journey, the company has now gone from having operating profits of $46 million to last year we did 64, and this year will be closer to 95. Our market capitalization is up at 3.3 billion from the low of about 100 million. And of course, we're debt-free after having made 2 acquisitions, which I'll talk about later. So we set about not only reinventing ourselves, but as a group, building a culture in the organization that has stood us in good stead. So because we went through adversity together, and because none of us looked around the room and blamed anyone, but instead stuck together, pulled on the creative mindsets of people in Australia, and Australia is a very, very creative and inventive country. It's very similar to Scotland. We invented a lot of things as well. But there's real character here, and it's easy to lead an organization with character. And it's almost a challenge for people when adversity strikes, when you're just about to see 600 of your colleagues lose their jobs, to get in a room and go, what can we do? And I've got to tell you, it's one of the most remarkable things that I've ever seen in my life, is seeing people, engineers, just band together, sales guys, administration people, accountants, everyone, just band together to rise from the ashes and become where we are today in the ASX 200. And that's come about by us putting together a strategy which has involved us looking at becoming a company that transforms from being a single products company. So we used to sell the HF radio. And I remember someone saying to me, look, the future is we've got to do more than just sell products. We've got to sell solutions. We've got to transition the business into a more high-level, high-value-add business. And so the next story is about Afghanistan. Everybody knows what's been happening in Afghanistan. We were invited to go there to try to produce radios for the US Army and for the indigenous Afghani forces to protect the borders from insurgents and to also stop the drug trade going back and forward. And we actually looked at our sales team, and our sales team were guys that were really not equipped for that environment. They were guys that were selling commercial products, commercial markets, to governments and to retail outlets. So we had to change our sales team, and we actually employed people that came out of the special forces. So the British SAS, we got a lot of guys out of the British SAS. We now have a couple of Navy SEALs. We've got some people that have walked in the shoes of the customer. And what we set about doing, which is a lesson, I think, for us and for everyone in business, is rather than trying to sell what we had, almost akin to selling watches from the inside of your jacket, we actually went to Afghanistan and we were with them for 3 months, the customer, and we observed the problem they were trying to solve. And after 3 months, we came back to them and said, look, after having listened to what you have told us, we think the problem you're trying to solve is to teach an indigenous, uneducated Afghan border guard how to become an intelligent decision maker. Now, none of that implies radios, none of that implies products, none of that implies anything that we do. But having described the problem in terms that they could understand because people that knew walked among them for 3 months, we were able to build a solution which took our radio, put encryption in there so that we could actually communicate from some of these remote border posts to the CIA supercomputer, which was manned by CIA operatives who had all the cultural and ethnic understanding of the types of people that were moving between borders in these countries. And instead of the rudimentary halt who goes there and some questioning that would ensue, which was quite rudimentary, and the borders were seen as porous, all of a sudden the conversation became more intelligent, it became more accurate. We were able to sort of have the border guards go, halt, who goes there, can you show me your passport? We would then incorporate biometrics into the radio, so you can put fingerprints, photo ID, you can scan passports. We'd use telephone interconnects, we'd use high-speed data modems that were encrypted. We can then open up a dialogue on the radio, the bit that we supply, with someone that was sitting in a CIA supercomputer room to actually say, well, if the person that's speaking to you today purports to come from this particular area of Pakistan, then he should be able to answer a series of these questions, culturally. And so there was dialogue that was intelligent, and people were then able to be either apprehended, refused, or entered with open arms into the country, but it was done from a point of knowledge as opposed to a random act from someone that just didn't know any better and didn't have the ability to make these kind of decisions. That got us thinking about, well, how do we take this type of understanding of a customer's problem and apply that across all of our business? And today, that's what we've become. We've looked at trying to understand what we would call technical disruption and try to either get the hell out of its way or become part of it. And for Codan, we've made 2 big acquisitions in the last month. So we bought a company called DTC, which is Domo Tactical Communications, spent $120 million on it. And that's brought us new technology that, again, we can supplement with our radio. So the radio these days constitutes something which is a physical piece of equipment, but also has the ability to interoperate with legacy networks. And one of the biggest objections that we found, having gone into some of these first and developing world countries, was the procurement guys are going, well, we already have a Motorola, or we already have a Harris. We really don't want a complicated life, so if we buy your product, we've pretty much got to start again, and we'll probably get fired. We don't want to do that. So we took away the objection. We put in an interoperability capability so that our radio can work with every other radio on the planet. So that took away the objection. And of course, our value proposition is we were half the price of some of these monopolists. So from South Australia, we were able to design radios, manufacture them, and actually get a chance to play because we took away objection. We actually understood the customer's concern. And so today we are now playing with tactical VHF, HF, interoperability. We've now just bought a technology called DTC, or a company called DTC, which does video on the cameras that are attached to the soldiers for special forces. And that makes up its own network, so when you're in the field as a special operations person, you can actually beam live video back to the control room, and you can have signals come up on your heads-up display to tell you what to do from a distance. So we are now turning our military into a more advanced capability that in real time is given information based on a situation that's unfolding in front of them, that back in the day you had to make split-second decisions on your own without any ability to have some calm thinking in the background. So that's kind of where Codan's heading in the military space. That's also being applied into governments, so police, emergency services, border protection, all of that stuff. And then on the other side of the fence, we've also got the public safety market, which we made an acquisition called Zetron. So that's a very noble type cause, and the 100 people that we have in Canada, and Gary was around when we made that acquisition. That was one of the good ones that he helped us with. There's a couple of others, but we won't talk about them. And these people are out there to do good. They're there to help the emergency services save lives. So it's the whole 911 protocol, or 911 next generation emergency call. So we've now brought technology and software into that to make it much more intelligent. I mean, you would be surprised these days that in the US, where there's a mass shooting too often, every other day, the intelligence in some of these systems now in the cameras are that when gunshots go off, they recognize the gunshot. You don't need to call 911. The camera does it for you. So the cameras are intelligent. They've got artificial intelligence. They'll recognize gunshot. They'll also recognize patterns of behavior that are different from what they had seen previously. So, for example, if you and I were walking down the street in New York, the camera's looking at us, it's fine. All of a sudden, if a scuffle breaks out or a protest or lots of people gather, the camera will respond instantaneously with an automated 911 call, which goes into software that interprets that and then goes into dispatch, and the whole emergency cycle is pushed into play without having to rely on solely someone on the end of the phone making the conversation. So technology is moving at a very fast rate, and for us to survive, we need to be part of it. We need to spot it coming down the street and either get out of its way or choose to play. And Codan has chosen to play in areas that we think we can add some value to the world and society, and we think we do noble work in a lot of places and a lot of areas. And on the other side, we have the metal detecting business, which has been the transformational story of Codan over the last 10 years, which is when we bought these guys. And today we have a business where the metal detectors, handheld metal detectors, that you see people walking along the beach, picking up all the things we've dropped on Sunday when we were there. We sell $350 million worth of metal detectors handheld a year. $350 million worth. The radio division, before we made the two acquisitions, was probably about a $100 million business. It was unbalanced. Having made the two acquisitions, that is now closer to a $250, $300 million business also, so it's actually balanced us up. We've hired 50 people in South Australia in the last 3 months. So we're on a very, very aggressive recruitment path, and we're looking to try and bring some of the brightest minds into our business to try and help us forge a path for the future. So we think the future is bright. It's a South Australian success story which I'm proud to have been a part of. And I've got to say that I'd like to see it around for another 60 years after I'm gone. So thank you for indulging me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Donald. We've got a little bit of time today, so I think we start a little bit early. So I'm sure after that very thought-provoking presentation, you've probably got plenty of questions. So over to you.
Sir, I enjoyed your talk. You didn't say anything about plastic mines and how your models can pick the plastic mines?
Sure. It's a good question, thank you. So part of our business is to provide equipment to clear landmines, which is a subject that's close to many people's hearts, particularly in the developing world. There's a statistic out there that if all of the metal detectors that have been designed to clear landmines were put to use today for 24 hours a day, they wouldn't clear them in my lifetime. Now, you might say, well, maybe you don't have long to go, but it would take years using every detector that we have to clear these landmines. Now, unfortunately, the funding to clear these landmines is almost non-existent. So the landmine clearance part of our business receives funding when governments have an interest to clear farmland, to displace people from the cities that are becoming overcrowded into farmlands. Angola is a classical example of civil war, having brought people into the Luanda, into the central part of Angola. And governments now just don't have space to house all these people. So they're now clearing landmines back in the country, which were put down during the Civil War, to try and repatriate people back in to become farmers and try to increase wealth by farming. That's a trend that we see all over the world. We've just developed a landmine detector that also incorporates ground-penetrating radar, because these days some of the bad guys are using just plastics. So we've got to try and find disruption in soil density. And we've also got a jamming device around it so that it can't be activated by a mobile phone when you're above it. So a lot of discussion on landmines, very poorly funded. We're still forging ahead to try and produce the best technology we can, should that situation change.
Don, that was a very powerful story about the pirating of your software, which you seem to have dealt with. I'm just interested if you just comment on your future constraints to growth, and particularly some of the key risks that you see going forward for you as a company.
Yeah. Look, for most companies, Stephen, that question would probably be money. For us, that's not the case. We are in a very strong financial position. Our business is valued at $3.3 billion. We could go to the market tomorrow and probably raise $500 million, should we wish to. The constraint for us is finding ideas that we think don't put the business at too much risk. So there's plenty of things you can go out and buy, but acquisition strategy is very difficult, and to grow organically, it just doesn't happen quickly enough. So for us, there's a twofold answer to that question. One is we want to grow organically, so we're spending about between 10 and 12% of the money that we make at the sales line back into developing new products. That's the lifeline of our growth strategy. That'll probably get us between 5 and 10% a year. To actually step that up and make it larger, we've got to buy growth, we've got to buy businesses, which we've just done with 2. But for us, it's about trying to buy around the core. If you try to do something that you don't know much about, then the stats will tell you that 80% of acquisitions actually do not deliver the economic value that they set out to achieve in any business case. And that's a pretty daunting statistic, and I certainly don't want to be the guy that tries to buck that trend. So we're trying to make acquisitions and grow organically, but make acquisitions in spaces like communications that we understand, and to take it to the developing world, which is a comparative advantage for us at Codan.
Hello. Are you doing any development or any testing on satellite communications? Are you working on that at all?
Remember I spoke about Gary and some of the things he didn't cover us with glory? Satellite was kind of one of these areas, but to his credit, he did a great job. We just got overtaken by technology, and we weren't fast enough to react as a company. We divested our satellite business, so it's left some scars on us in the company. We understand that satellite is a progressive way moving forward. So at this stage, what we're doing is we're cozying up beside people and we're partnering with them to try to gain our appetite back again. We are not doing our own development. We used to. But it's an area that we can't ignore. It's going to be important. It's going to become more important as time goes on.
Don, thank you very much for your presentation. before you came on, I already knew that Codan was an organisation that I could depend my life on. And twice, Codan has saved both my life and the life of one of my colleagues. So the first time I was in the South China Sea, and we had a accident on board our ship, a naval ship, and we needed to get medical assistance to someone back in Manila without anyone else knowing that we were in the China Sea. And using Morse code.
Through the radio?
Yep.
Yep.
Morse code radio. I was able to get a signal through to Manila, and by the time we were in range, we had helo transfer of the individual without anyone knowing. The second time was when I was halfway between Uluru and Broome, in the middle of the sandy desert, Great Sandy Desert, and I blew a CV joint. And so I was able to put a voice HF call through to Adelaide, and within 60 hours we had a new CV joint into the middle of the Great Sandy Desert, which we changed over, and that got us through to Broome. And I know this is really old communications, but it really reinforced to me that if you needed to get a message through, you could rely on Codan.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate it. It is still by physics the only way you can communicate over long distances without infrastructure, so you're absolutely right.
Got another one over here, Don.
Yep.
Thank you. Some governments around the world at the moment are using artificial intelligence technologies for some quite questionable purposes ethically. Does Codan have any sorts of, policies or procedures in place to determine that the markets that you're selling to are of beneficial purposes to those that they intend to serve?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Didn't think anyone would ask it, but we are very, very constrained with who we sell to. So, for example, if we sell a product that has encryption, which can be used for good or bad, the cameras for special forces, and which force are we selling these to, has to go through, we have to apply for an export certificate, and it is vetted by the Australian government, both DFAT and DECO. Now, you can argue who's good and who's bad these days, that's another conversation. But we have to be given an export certificate to sell after having verified with enough information who the end user actually is. So not through a distributor or a dealer, but who is the actual end agent. And the end agent, sometimes it can take 6 months for us to be given an export certificate to clear the pathway for us to sell. So the answer is yes, and it can be quite tiring at times going through trying to sell to the UN, who we already know can take 6 months. That's another conversation about the speed of government.
That's it. Oh, we've got one more.
Last one?
Keep it going all afternoon.
Yeah, keep going.
Thank you, Don. You answered a question I asked myself, nearly 10 years ago. On the Cambodia-Vietnam border, I was told that the mine detectors they were using came from Adelaide. And I thought, wow.
Yep.
And the significant thing is that villagers were using them, and they negotiated first who would get to use the land once they'd cleared it.
Yep.
And so it was owned by the villagers cleaning the land.
And that would be the purpose of the actual land clearance operation, you're right.
Okay. Well, thank you, Donald. I can say that there is some still good Australian sovereign satellite technology being developed here. It's up in Brisbane. That'll be a subject for another day. A donation has been made on your behalf to Rotary Club of Adelaide Local Community and Youth Programs. So thank you for coming today. It's taken a little while to get Donald here. We bounced him for Christopher Pine there a few months ago, so we were lucky to get him back, but that was a fantastic talk, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you.